So I wanted to talk about something called WIMP, and it's not what it sounds like. So WIMP uh, was a math program that I was involved in sixth grade, and it stood for Westport Individualized Math Program. I don't know who came up with the name because it's a bad name to name anything for kids. But in any case, what they did was they decided to kind of re-engineer how math was taught in our class. And for that year, we were all kind of test subjects. And the way it worked was instead of the traditional format where a teacher would stand in front of the room and lecture and work out problems on the board, they would have us all work individually. And basically they would give us these little units. It was one topic per unit, and you had a written piece of paper that described how to do a particular problem. And then you had some sample problems you could work through. And then you took a kind of a test. There was a pre-test. So you'd see how you did on that. And then there was what was called the diagnostic. And I think as long as you went past 70 or 80%, you passed and you were ready to go on to the next one. And even if you didn't pass the diagnostic, what would happen then is you'd ask for help and you'd get a little tutoring. Both the teacher and a teacher's assistant would basically just walk around the room and help anybody who needed help. And so if you didn't pass the diagnostic, they would help you a little bit. You take it again, and then you'd be on to the next one. And for some reason, this really worked for me. So I ended up finishing the whole math curriculum in just about half the time. And then I was pretty much done. I can't even remember what they had me do after that. But it was quite remarkable for me because I hadn't really excelled in school. I was okay in math, and I mean I was a a slightly, I would say, average, maybe slightly just past B level student. So even at that young age, this really caught my attention because somehow it fit my learning style really, really well, and it kept me engaged. And the minute I finished one unit, I wanted to jump onto the next one because I was kind of curious what's going to be on the next one. So over the years, this really made an impression on me, and I've sort of backwards engineered the elements in it that really worked for me. And I like to apply it to how I approach projects and how I apply my work. And one thing that really struck me about it is when I was engaged in that, I sort of got into flow, and it seemed like I never really got stuck. And it was the closest that I've come to sort of perpetual motion. And I realized, right, I sort of have this belief that if you remove just enough friction from an endeavor, you do sort of get into perpetual motion. And another great example of that is video games. Like a well-designed video game, they're designed to step you up at just the pace that you kind of get hooked. Like, what's the next challenge, and you work at that for a while, and then you want another one and another one. And it really becomes sort of addicting in a way. So I was curious, okay, how do I map that out for my own process? And so I'll talk about some of the things that I learned, but what I want to say is that your particular template most likely will look very different than mine. But I'll give you a couple more examples, and then we can talk about ways that you could map out your particular template so that, hopefully if you have projects or things that you're stuck on, this will help you get moving. So other places that I noticed this in my life was I love JetBlue Airlines, and the reason I sort of fell in love with it initially was they took this really cumbersome, very uncomfortable process, and they re-engineered the whole thing so that when I would go fly, it didn't feel like effort. It felt very easy. Like everything was really well worked out, from check-in to waiting to boarding the plane, being on the plane, the way they handled, food. They were the first ones with little TV sets. So the whole experience just became very smooth and effortless. So that's another thing that I look at. Another place that I look is different stores, and stores have really come a long way, but it used to be, it could be very cumbersome buying something. And I went to buy a new suitcase this year, and I went to the store called Away, and I got to say it was one of the easiest. It was the smoothest process I've had. And I went there, I looked at a couple, spoke to the people. They were very helpful. They weren't invasive. Basically, we figured out what I wanted. You wait 2 minutes and they bring it down. It's all nicely wrapped for you. You check out on an iPad, email receipt. And the great thing was, I took the bag home, and ultimately the bag didn't suit my needs. And I was really kind of worried about, oh no, it's going to be a problem returning this bag, even though there was a 3-month grace period. But I brought it back, and there wasn't even they didn't even question at all. They just said, oh, okay, you don't want the bag. They tapped on the iPad. I didn't have to show them a receipt or anything. And they said the money was automatically refunded. So that was fantastic. So, that's another example. And then another place that I look for this is what ways I like to engage in exercise. And, are you somebody that likes a long workout? Do you like short little segments? Do you like short sets, long sets? Do you like to be with a trainer? Do you like to work out with a friend or in a class or something interactive? And if you look at these clues, they can also tell you, what makes things smooth and work for you. One area I used to get stuck was if I had to do some business writing, I would tend to freeze up and get very, very stuck, very in my head. And what I found is that if I worked next to a friend or worked collaboratively with a friend, the whole thing just flowed. Like I could basically crank out a bunch of writing in no time, just by having somebody there and somebody to bounce ideas off a little bit. So that's another kind of hack that I found. So one of the variables that I think is really good to look at is, sort of the chunk size. Do you want small little bits of an activity? And that's definitely me. I can do small chunks of an activity all day. Whereas if I'm thinking like a big chunk, it tends to slow me down. But some people are quite different. Some people would prefer to think in a kind of bigger picture and longer swaths of time. Since I'm more on the small chunk size side of things, there's a technique called the Pomodoro technique, where if you're working on a big project that it's hard to see a milestone, you set a 10-minute timer and you say, okay, for 10 minutes, I'm only focusing on this. And then you decide how many Pomodoros you want to do. It might be one a day, it might be 3 or 4 a day. But something about keeping that chunk size small and then give yourself a little break, that can be very motivating, at least for someone like me, where it fits my kind of basic unit of work. I would take a look at your life, not just your work life, but like I said, it could be working out, could be air travel, could be what types of restaurants or even takeout places do you like? Very often the ones that you like will have a process that's fitting your thinking style. And in terms of learning projects, you really want to look also at your learning style. Like, do you like more interactive learning? Do you like hands-on learning? Some people like to just sit down quietly with a book, but some people only like to learn, nowadays from videos. And, you could look at the Khan Academy, where the whole thing is videos. I had a client once, and for whatever reason, he just didn't process information very well in terms of reading. But if he watched videos, he would get the gist of it, and then he could go to the text and kind of pick up more detail. So I highly recommend that you take a little time, identify a couple places where you really get into the flow easily, and then begin to analyze, okay, what's going on in these particular contexts or these projects that's making me kind of crank things out. Some people like deadlines, so you can insert more deadlines, and that would actually help make you a little bit more productive. Once you've identified it, you can start to put together your elements, and then I run little experiments. I'll have days where I'll do everything a particular way just to see, oh, does that make me a little bit more productive? Sometimes I like to, like a little trick that I do with myself is, if I have a bunch of reading to do, I'll just give myself the task of reading one page. And I know it's a trick because I know that when I read that one page, I'll go past that. But just saying that my commitment is one page really helps me kind of open the door and get into it. So I hope you have some fun identifying, beginning to chart out your WIMP template, and I would love to hear how it goes. So leave a comment.